You are in for a real treat today. We're going to share with you some of our best moments from the last 2 years of weekly broadcasts. This is our final live LD Expert episode, but we're not going away. Don't worry, we'll still be here for you with our LD Expert podcast, newsletter, and monthly live Q&A at our virtual peace meeting. We started this broadcast in April of 2020 to support parents and to connect with professionals working with students with learning and attention challenges. What an incredible journey it's been. We've gotten to know our faithful followers from all over the country and have loved having new viewers join us each week. Our guests have been absolutely brilliant and so generous with their time and expertise. This is LD Expert Live. Welcome to LD Expert Live, your place for answers and solutions for learning differences, dyslexia, and attention challenges. I'm your host, Jill Stowell, founder of Stowell Learning Centers and author of At Wit's End, A Parent's Guide to Ending the Struggle, Tears, and Turmoil of Learning Disabilities. This book will help you understand why some bright children and teens struggle in school and what can be done to change that permanently. To get a free copy, go to parentsatwitsend.com. Let's say hello to Lauren, our moderator and the Director of Clinical Growth and Operations at Stowell Learning Centers. Good morning, Lauren.
Good morning. It's been so much fun checking in with all of you live every week. So for a final time, let us know that you're here with us. If you're watching live by posting in the chat, let us know that you're here and where you're checking in from, as well as post your questions or comments for today's show, and we will check in on those as well.
Thank you, Lauren. If you're just joining us, this is LD Expert Live. I'm your host, Jill Stowell. Learning disabilities and dyslexia are not anything new, but the last couple of years really put a spotlight on just how difficult having these challenges can be. I left public schools over 35 years ago to find real solutions to learning and attention challenges so that struggling students don't have to spend their lives working around the difficulties, but can enjoy learning and thrive. What we do at Stowell Learning Centers is different from special education at school and different from traditional tutoring. Instead of helping students learn to compensate or manage their learning challenges, we're looking to permanently eliminate the struggles. Believe it or not, this is a pretty lonely message. It's not what most educators or therapists are talking about. But with our guests, I found so many like-minded professionals who are addressing the root challenges rather than the symptoms. It's encouraging to see that the world is waking up to the fact that real change is possible for individuals with dyslexia and other learning challenges. If we want to make real change, we have to get to the root of the problem. I've put together a series of clips from previous shows that look at real change and why it's possible. To look at this new view of learning and behavior, we have Dr. Mona Delahooke, author of Beyond Behaviors and Brain-Body Parenting. You know, in our learning centers, it's called a learning center. So of course, you know, our focus is learning, but really everything that you talked about encompasses learning. You have to look at all of those pieces. When students have learning challenges, they often resist doing homework, and parents find themselves working very hard to get past that resistance. And, you know, the real problem isn't the whining or the avoidance. It's the fact that the child is mentally exhausted or doesn't have the skills to do the job.
Mm.
Well, when kids have challenging behaviors, the same is true. I mean, the parent spends a lot of time managing behavior,
Mm.
but the behavior is just a symptom. So responding to behavior differently requires looking at behavior differently. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about that paradigm shift in how behavior is viewed.
Absolutely. Well, truly, I think our culture, certainly our educational culture, and even our mental health world, our systems are quite obsessed with behaviors as the
Mhm.
target. As
Mhm.
you know, there are big industries that look at behaviors and how to decrease problematic behaviors or challenging behaviors or noncompliance. So that system, which views behaviors as the target,
Mhm.
when you look at relational neuroscience and you really look at the work post the decade of the brain, which is in the 1990s, what I discovered is that the way we are treating behaviors as the target instead of the signal of what's happening in that brain body connection is the needed paradigm shift. Because when we over focus on behaviors, and again, I have an ask for everyone who's listening right now, and that this is a no blame, no shame situation. If you're a teacher or a parent and you're like, I'm looking at my child's behaviors, or I'm focusing on that, please have compassion for yourself. This is how we're trained. This is how we're
Mhm.
taught, is that we need to help our children have better behaviors. But truly, the paradigm shift is that behaviors are the tip of the iceberg. And what lies underneath, the invisible part, under the waterline, are those millions of causes that we need to
Right.
look at ideally, before we start messing around with behaviors, because behaviors can be protective. And they often are protective
Mhm.
to our children.
Absolutely. I think about that with coping strategies. When kids have learning challenges, they do things that once their learning challenges are changed,
Mm.
they don't need those behaviors anymore. But while they're in the midst of the struggle, those are protective. That's absolutely right. It's how they manage.
They're protective. And I think a very important concept for us to understand is that they are not volitionally or intentionally mediated. What does that mean?
Mhm.
It means that not all behaviors are created by the child with intentionality. In other words, children don't generally think about throwing something off their table or ripping their paper in half ahead of time. It's often a stress behavior, a stress response that is subconsciously mediated by the body's system of protection. And that system of protection moves us into activities that might look agitated and usually involve movement. That is the nervous system's way of trying to feel calm again.
Mhm.
So it's really a whole mind-bending shift from how we usually view behaviors, which is something we want to discourage. Like if a child is having, a tantrum, that we try to help them end the tantrum as quickly as possible, rather than being curious about what is that stress pathway that is happening for this child or teenager, or even ourselves, that needs to be attended to.
What I love about this clip is that paradigm shift from focusing on the symptoms to looking at the underlying root of the problem. Children do well when they can, whether it's behavior or learning. And it's time we gave them that benefit of the doubt and look at what's really causing the problem. It's more compassionate and it's more effective. We'll put the contact information in the chat for you for all of the professionals that we highlight today. Mona talked about looking under behaviors. In our next clip, Lauren and I are discussing the underlying root of learning challenges. Lauren, you were a second grade teacher in public school. When kids struggled and weren't able to be independent, what did that look like?
Well, when kids are not good at something, a lot of times when everybody is not good at something, a lot of times we deflect. We choose other behaviors that'll distract or take away or get us out of something that's uncomfortable. And kids are exactly the same. So when kids could not be independent, a lot of times they had behaviors that sometimes for teachers were kind of annoying, and a lot of teachers that maybe haven't done this kind of work just chalked it up to bad behavior, and it's really not. It's more avoidance. So I had kids that, I'd give an assignment, and slowly, you have a class of 30, and slowly the child would start to put the paper in their desk instead of work on it. Or as soon as I gave an assignment, the hand would go up, I need to go to the bathroom, and they'd be in the bathroom for 15 minutes. We had kids that like did things that they were better at, like chatting with their neighbors. They were social. They were the class clown. They would, make everybody laugh. And so they were good at that. And that would a lot of times deflect from what they weren't good at. And so that's often what it looks like when kids are not comfortable or confident in what they're doing. It comes out in behaviors. And if you're a new teacher, if maybe you haven't had this experience working with underlying skills, you might think that it's just a behavior problem. We're actually not. Just like adults, if I'm not good at something, I'm going to try to avoid it for a while, but our kids don't have that option.
Right. Yes. Challenges in school, whether they're in the classroom or now parents are finding remotely at home, a lot of times they look like attention or behavior problems. And here's why. Having a learning or attention challenge is kind of like trying to do a job at the top of a ladder when some of the rungs underneath are unstable. So think about for a second, if you are at the top of a ladder and you're, say, changing a light bulb, but some of the rungs underneath are wobbly. Well, where is your attention and energy going to be focused? It's not going to be 100% on that task of changing the light bulb, right? It's going to be focused on not falling off the ladder. Well, you can place the skills needed for learning on a continuum that builds kind of like a ladder. So at school, kids are working up at the top of the continuum, learning reading, writing, spelling, math, and all those other subject areas. But there are whole sets of underlying skills that have to be in place in order to work efficiently at the top. So if you look at the bottom of the ladder, the green down there, those are core learning skills. Those are skills that allow us to be organized in our body, to have self-control, to move through space easily, to sit still, to manipulate a pencil, to move our eyes across the page for reading. These are skills that should be so automatic that we don't even have to think about them. They just happen. Now, as we move up a little bit, up to the blue there, we have processing skills, which is a little bit higher in the brain and a little higher on the continuum. These are skills like memory, various attention skills, how we perceive and think about information that we see and hear, how quickly we can comprehend and respond. And then moving up the next level, we have executive function, which is kind of like our personal manager. When any of these underlying skills are weak or inefficient, it diverts attention and it causes everything to be harder and take longer. So here's what you need to know. These skills can be developed. it's that strong foundation of underlying skills that is really the key to independence. So, Lauren, wouldn't you say that the behaviors that are so frustrating and worrisome to parents usually correlate with inefficient skills lower down on the continuum?
Absolutely. And it reminds me of an example. We had a student many years ago who fit this, kind of was a poster child for exactly what was going on lower level. And sometimes it doesn't even look like an academic problem or a school problem. We had a student, Evan, who came to us. He was fairly young, and he was having behavioral problems. I mean, he was absolutely tearing his family apart. The entire family functioned kind of as a unit to get around Evan's behavior because he was so inflexible, and he was like kind of like a loose cannon. Like he could go off at any moment, and any little trigger could set him off. And so the family had actually changed their routines and their dynamics because they knew that Evan couldn't handle sudden changes, something unexpected. They knew they had to front load him before there might have been a situation that he couldn't be in control of. And parents had no idea that it could be related to underlying skills. They thought he was just like that. And soon at school, he started to get a reputation at school for kind of just being a loose cannon. And socially, it was starting to impact him. The kids knew that they either avoid him or purposely pick on him because they like to see him erupt. And actually what was going on with Evan was happening at that core learning skills level, that green level. He actually had a number of retained reflexes that were constantly firing and getting in his way and putting him into an emotional reactive state, because that's what a reflex is. It makes you react without thinking. And as we worked with him and worked to integrate those retained reflexes down at that core learning level, his behavior changed. And it was amazing to see, because it's not like we were working on behavior. We weren't setting up rewards and consequences and anything like that. We were developing those underlying skills that for Evan were weak and were causing a disruption to his entire life, to his family's entire life. So definitely when I hear parents, tell me their stories about their kids, it often is centered around the frustrating behavior. And parents often don't know what to do and why it's happening.
Right. And I think it's either a behavior or attention. A lot of times when kids struggle, it comes across as attention challenges in the classroom. I remember a 4th grade student named Michael. He was dyslexic and he really struggled to read his schoolwork, but he was funny and social. So whenever it was time to do any kind of written work in class, he'd just start entertaining his classmates instead of doing his work. And then he would take all of his work home where his mom would help him. So to the teacher, it just looked like he had an attention problem. But the real issue had to do with auditory and visual processing of sounds and words.
And the thing, especially for teachers, for parents, kind of the school system in general, is that the school expects these skills to be automatic. And research has told us, they've done research studies that about 30% of the population, these skills aren't automatic. Mm-hmm. And so there's going to be a disconnect. And so even when I was a teacher in my classroom, kind of when I was taught best practices, they would say, teach, and when 70% of the class gets it, move on. Okay, well, that's going to happen almost every time. If you think 30% of the population is going to have some difficulty with these underlying skills and some difficulty with learning. So, but what if your kid is in that 30%?
Right.
Do you want the teacher just to move on? Probably not.
If you follow LD Expert, I know you've heard us talk about the learning continuum many times, but believe it or not, it's a pretty revolutionary concept. And it's the reason why our students make the changes they do. Breakthroughs in neuroscience research have proven that the brain can be retrained to process information and learn more easily. In this next clip, cognitive consultant Alexandra Dunnison talks about the kinds of therapies that retrain the brain and develop the underlying skills. At the beginning of the show, I talked about getting to the root of the problem instead of putting a Band-Aid on the symptoms. You know, moms know in their gut that there's got to be something more permanent when their child is struggling, but they don't always know what getting to the root of the problem should look like. I'm sure you run into that all the time. You recommend neuroplastic interventions for your clients. What does that mean?
Yeah, so anything you do is going to basically improve your brain function. In other words, if it's all just positive, right? So if you are thinking positive thoughts, that can change your brain. So neuroplastic changes mean that you are actually like neurons that's from the word neuro, our brain cells, and plasticity is more, instead of plastic, I like to think of it more like plasticine, because plastic is rigid, but plasticine is malleable. So what that really means is that your brain is capable of changing. And we know that the brain is capable of changing. Now we know that it's capable of changing throughout life, even into old age. In the past, we thought this was a recent discovery. People think it's a recent discovery, but it's actually been around since the 1800s. So even though all learning is changing your brain, I'm looking for things that are outside the box, non-traditional, not really focused on content, but focused on improving your brain function, your cognitive capacities.
This is an incredibly hope-filled message. With the breakthrough of neuroplasticity research, all those myths about having to live with dyslexia or learning disabilities were shattered. We can make real change to the root cause of the challenge. Sometimes the root cause is not what you think. In our next clip, speech language pathologist and founder of Bright Beginnings Speech and Learning Center, Stacy Payne, talks about the connections between speech, movement, and reading. Many people don't realize that there is actually a strong correlation between early speech and language issues and learning challenges later on in school. I would love for you to talk about that, about learning challenges specifically from a speech therapist perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a lot of correlation. We know as speech pathologists that a lot of learning is rooted in language and communication. The same parts of the brain that are responsible for spelling, reading, writing are the same areas of the brain that are responsible for early speech and language development. That's where the left temporal lobe is where the language center is. And all of those foundational skills that we rely on for learning begin with early speech, language, and communication. All that brain mapping that's going on in early developing brains stays with us and serves children through those academic years. So we know from very early on, speech sound development is the foundation for reading, spelling, writing, communication. So it's very, very closely related. There's been a lot of research in that connection between speech and learning.
We talked earlier about how auditory processing is a key underlying skill for both speaking and reading, and of course, listening. You wouldn't necessarily think that core learning skills, those skills down at the very bottom of the continuum, would be very much involved in speech and language. But we have had students who were either nonverbal or who had very disorganized language start to speak or start expressing themselves more easily as we worked to develop those core learning skills through movement. So everything is really connected. Do you have any thoughts on that, Stacy?
Well, I couldn't agree more. You know, everything is connected. And we know there is such a connection between the brain and the body. And even if we're thinking just from a language perspective, there is a huge part of speech pathology that is focused on the research that connects language and movement. You know, today, our kids don't get the opportunity to move the way I got to when I was a child, you know, because we live in such a litigious environment. You know, things that used to be on the schoolyard are no longer there, or in playgrounds are no longer there. If you think of all of the phenomenal stimulation that we got as children, just going to the park at the corner, those merry-go-round things, the metal ones that you'd burn your hands on, you'd run and then you'd hop on it and you'd just spin and spin and spin and spin. Cartwheels, slides, swings, all of that movement serves to organize the brain. And when the brain and the body are organized and in balance, you are free to produce so much more that is otherwise locked inside. So it's so important for kids to do things. Just, you know, I have been talking a lot about young children, but starting at young children to older children, roll down hills, spin around, you know, swing and slide. I feel like as parents, we get so busy and there's so much that we pack into the day. I get it. It's my life too. But it's so important to give your child those opportunities, starting from when they're very little, to move, to roll, to jump, to turn upside down. All of that is basically what we're addressing that was missed when we're working on core learning skills and integrating reflexes. We're not really, as a society, I think, giving our kids the opportunity to organize all of that within their little bodies because they're sitting still all the time. They're younger and younger when they're starting school. They're forced to sit at a desk when really, you know, 20, 30 years ago, they would have been outside, you know, upside down, hanging, you know, climbing trees and on monkey bars and getting all of that really great information that their brain craves in order to be able to put all of these neurologic connections together to serve them in an academic arena.
I love what Stacy shared because it shows how many pieces like language and movement need to be in place to create a solid foundation for attention and reading and learning. Speaking of reading, our next guest, Dr. Joan Smith, has been an incredible mentor for me and one of the top experts in dyslexia. She's going to talk about the dyslexic brain, which opens up a whole new understanding of how to address dyslexia. One of the things that I really love about your work is that you always correlate the challenges and the solutions to the brain. So let's talk a little bit about the current brain research and kind of what it's showing about the dyslexic reader.
I'd love to talk about the brain, as you know, and I even have one. Well, I have two. I have one, I hope, upstairs here, but I have this one too. So I brought it for you to see today. And it kind of looks like a glob, but really what a brain is it's the consistency of pretty hard margarine, okay? So it's pretty soft in that sense. And our brains have two hemispheres. They have one on the right and one on the left, so one on each side of the head. What we're doing at this point and what we know is so exciting because for the first time in our profession, and I think for you and I especially, we can find out what's going on inside this structure as we're working with it. For many, many years, and for most of my professional time, I knew what the input I was giving, and I could measure the output, but I didn't know what was going on in the middle other than to, you know, kind of make informed guesses about, okay, this is probably the area that's not working right. We need to work in this way. The exciting thing we know now is that this brain actually has different areas that acquire the information, and dyslexic brains are totally different in terms of where they're sending their information. So perhaps we can look at that for a minute. You see the red area there is the area in which when you read a word, and especially as a beginning reader, when they first start looking at sounds or at symbols or even at words, that red area is the one that's going to light up, because that's the area in the brain in which we are holding information that's symbolic in nature, and we are now attaching sounds to it and even recognition of what that word is and maybe even what it means. Now, the interesting thing that we're finding happens is that for dyslexic readers, they are primarily activating that green area. Well, the green area that you see is up on the frontal lobe in the brain, and this is the area that primarily has always been responsible for articulation. So when you talk, that area lights up. If you were to have an injury to that area, you would not be able to speak. And so, that's one of the reasons we know how that works, and we've known that for many years. But our articulation area is the area in which, if you are working on sounding out a word, that area is going to light up. That yellow area in the back is the key area for good readers. If you're a strong reader, what's going to happen is you're going to go to that area, which is actually called the occipital temporal lobe, and it's in the back of the brain on the left side, probably. Now let's just talk about side for a minute, because we have the two hemispheres in our brain. One hemisphere is responsible for language, and one is responsible for more spatial organization types of things. And they do share a lot of their information between the two of them. If you are primarily a right-hander, your information is actually going to be more likely on the left side of your brain. That's where you're going to be doing your reading, and most of your language is going to be coming in. And 90% of right-handers read on the left side, okay? People who are left-handers, it's kind of half and half. 50% go on one side, 50% would be on the other. So we aren't always sure whether they're reading on this side or this side. And for most things that we do, that doesn't matter, because we're going to give that information and share it. Now, the language side of the brain then is absolutely key in processing reading. Now that we know that dyslexics tend to read up into the frontal lobe in the articulation area, we know that they are not activating the language part of the brain and the one that actually holds information like a good reader does. So this is going to mean we're going to make some changes in how we present information to individuals who have these issues. And I think that's the biggest key in why we're successful in relieving the symptoms that go with dyslexia, because we're actually going to target different ways of creating, pathways in the brain, connections, neurological connections, so that they actually begin holding information in the occipital temporal lobe, which is in the back of the brain.
Imaging studies have definitely shown that the dyslexic brain is wired differently. So knowing that helps us understand what brain areas need to be activated in reading therapy. This is a huge breakthrough. This is LD Expert Live. I hope you're enjoying our journey through the last 2 years. This is our last live show, and Lauren and I would love to talk to you. So post your comments and questions, and we're going to do a little Q&A.
Hello. Yes. So we have Karen, a faithful viewer and past guest on our show, checking in from Sacramento. Hello, Karen. was so fun for 2 years to connect with you. I feel like I know you and I've never met you in person. It's amazing. And we have Angelica. Hello from sunny California. I love seeing all of these professionals talk about hope. Absolutely. They are inspiring me. And I completely agree with Stacy's message. Kids should be given time to run around like we did as kids. Absolutely. Yes. And I agree with that message of hope. That is the theme. It's funny. I mean, just this is kind of a recap, a celebration for us, 2 years of connecting with these amazing professionals. And that is the theme. As you watch all these clips back to back, we have all these like-minded professionals that we were able to connect with that have that same message. There's hope. Things can be better than where they are. And so, and we want to share that with parents. We want the world to know that. We have Courtney. Are there some dyslexics that will never be able to rewire to use the occipital temporal lobe like natural readers? So a science question based on what Joan shared with us.
I will tell you, in our experience, it's not always a quick process. It usually isn't a quick process. But in our experience, even our most profoundly dyslexic learners have been able to become readers, good readers, and enjoy it. So it's really, so often you'll see these kids kind of get stuck with sound by sound decoding. And if that's how they're reading, where they sound out everything, and it's pretty laborious, they're working in an inefficient area in the brain. And so the kinds of therapies that we use are really targeting that occipitotemporal lobe.
And a follow-up question from Joyce. So how do you switch the dyslexic brain from activating in the frontal lobe to the occipital lobe?
It's really the kinds of training we're doing. We do not want to really work on sound by sound decoding. We're really, even at the decoding stage, we're looking at identifying the vowel sound and the whole word. We're trying to always incorporate not only the sounds, they have to be able to process and think about sounds, but how the whole word looks. So activating the visual memory and the meaning of the word. So we do a lot of work that incorporates all of those pieces and contributes to fluency.
Yeah, really an integrated process, right? Because you want to activate all those pieces. Reading is an integrated process, and that's sometimes the difficulty when you do a traditional, decoding method, or it only activates one part of it, and it really needs to be fully integrated to activate those correct places in the brain. Let's see, a follow-up question from Courtney. Is there anyone who redoes the brain imaging after therapy to see if it's truly rewired?
We have never done that. Joan Smith and I talked about, she worked for a while with Dr. Daniel Amen, who does a lot of brain imaging. And we always dreamed about how amazing it would be to be able to do pre and post brain scans with our students. It did not come about, but we have seen the results of, we see it in the practical results. They go from being laborious, sound by sound, slow readers to being able to read accurately. And typically our dyslexic kids have really good comprehension, but it gets lost in their slow reading. And so the end result is that they get to enjoy reading because now they're reading accurately and quicker and processing the imaging, the pictures and mental pictures and comprehension at the same time.
Yeah, it just looks so much less effortful when you see a remediated dyslexic reader, because they're not, we always just say that to parents. It's like, because they'll say, well, he can read, and we go and test the skill. And when you test the pure reading skills, either decoding or fluency, accuracy, things like that, the skill breaks down when you take out the element of comprehension. It's like, yes, he can read, but he's doing it in an inefficient way. And that's why it looks so laborious, and it takes so much more time and energy, and he's exhausted and he doesn't want to do it, all of those things. And so when our kiddos are remediated, the proof is in the pudding. It just looks so much less effortful for them. They're able to do it like their typical peers. So let's see. We have Wendy asking, what are your thoughts on remediation versus accommodations? My dyslexic daughter has become a decent reader, but much prefers audiobooks. Should I be pushing her to read more?
Wow, that's kind of a loaded question. The first thing is, we are all about getting at the underlying issues, the underlying processing or learning skills that are not supporting the students learning well enough, and developing those, and then remediating the reading, writing, spelling, math, whatever the academic issue is, so that the student can go on and really be a comfortable, independent learner and learn at their potential. So my first very strong bias is use accommodations while you're going after the underlying skills and remediating the problem, but don't feel like accommodations are going to be the be all end all. That's how your child is going to have to live. That being said, if your daughter enjoys listening to audiobooks and having that tool to help her, to get the information from school, I mean, anything that's going to help a student be successful, we want to do that. I just never want people to think that they're going to be stuck with an accommodation, because there's no other way. Accommodations are great and helpful, but what we want to do is correct the problem, so they don't need them.
Absolutely. We have Amy asking about auditory training. Is online therapy for auditory processing disorder enough, or do you have to do in person? Also, how do you test for slow processing speed?
Lauren, would you like to chime in? I'm doing all the talking.
Absolutely. Well, absolutely. So we do work with students with auditory challenges, both remotely and in person. The testing is better. You can test more skills auditorily when you have the right equipment in person. But we have done remote screenings with students with auditory challenges and have gotten really good information, and a pretty accurate picture of the students' needs and challenges. And we're able to do training remotely with students with auditory challenges. One of our past guests, Adeline Smith, is a student, and she has been posting. She has like a blog, or on Instagram, she has an account, and she's been posting her journey. And she lives in Utah, so we've been working with her completely remotely. And she has been kind of documenting her changes. So if you kind of want a testimonial into the, just the benefits of doing remote auditory training, you can check out her account, because she's been documenting her process and just the different changes that have been occurring with her training with us. And so we know it can be effective to do remote auditory training. It does involve sending you equipment, or sending the student equipment, wearing specialized equipment during the training sessions when they're on the computer with us, and also a home component. A lot of times a sound therapy program to train the auditory system when they don't have sessions with us. And both we've seen have been highly effective. So there are options. I mean, that is why we started our remote training, is so that we could provide options to students who otherwise didn't have options in their community for correcting learning challenges. And we know it can be done. So absolutely. And then for your second question about how you test slow processing speed, we have a number of tests that kind of go after that. There is an online component. We do a processing skills screening that can be done on the computer that tests for processing speed, visual processing speed. There is a way that you can test for auditory temporal processing speed with the auditory system, and there are some tests that test that as well. So you want to test processing speed in more than just one channel, and a lot of times that is what we're looking for when we do an assessment with a student. Is this challenge only related to the visual system? Is this challenge only related to the auditory system? Or do we see it throughout testing? And that tells us if it's truly a processing speed challenge. So that's the whole reason we use the continuum. And when we look at all of those underlying skills, you have to look at them in so many different ways. You have to really pay attention to the whole picture.
You're brilliant. Thank
Oh,
you.
thanks. Well, I learned from the best. Hey. 16 years and counting. Okay, let's see. Lots of questions. I love it. We're getting into the science. So I'm sure a lot of people are going to be really excited about your new book that has a lot of that science stuff in there. Stephanie asks, I feel like you have described my 14-year-old and has been diagnosed with a disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. How can I help my daughter? She struggles with attention and behavioral issues.
Wow. I feel like I don't have quite enough information there. I will say that with the issue of behavior and attention, as we talked about before, there are sometimes those symptoms are directly related to underlying skills. If the student is not getting enough information auditorily, I mean, if they have really weak auditory processing, it can affect their energy, their mood, their motivation, and of course, their ability to take in information and give correct responses. There can be, as Lauren described in one of the videos, low-level body organization things with retained reflexes that are just triggering this neurological interference and discomfort that a student is living with. And so that can also, manifest in behavior or attention challenges. So there are a lot of pieces to this puzzle. We have had a number of guests on the show that, and there might be shows that you would want to take a look at. Dr. Eli Lebowitz, Dr. Stuart Ablon, Debra Ann Afarian, all talk about mood and behavior and some specific ways to look at that and strategies that you can use. So check those out because I think those might be helpful to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even in that diagnosis, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, dysregulation is the key. And everything we talked about with reflexes at that core learning level, that's usually where it stems from. The body, the system is dysregulated or gets thrown into a dysregulated state all the time, and that's a lower level brain function. And a lot of times with traditional behavioral approaches, they are trying a top-down approach. They're trying to get the child to be in control and willfully, kind of in line. And we found that a lot of times you're just spinning your wheels if you try a top-down only approach, because there is something dysregulating about the system and the brain that has to be addressed. Yeah.
Right. And in fact, Dr. Mona Delahooke, who was in our first clip, she just came out with a book called Brain Body Parenting. And that might be really helpful because it's really looking at exactly what Lauren talked about, that dysregulation that impacts, mood and behavior.
Absolutely. We have Adelina, another friend of the show, and we know her. Are there any other types of neurological conditions that could inhibit these therapies from being successful?
Every child is different, and with different conditions, of course, everything has a different impact. So we have found that we get a wide range of ages and challenges and how involved a student is, how many issues there are. And so certainly certain issues are gonna have more impact than others. But we do see that using this continuum approach and really looking at the underlying skills makes changes for all of these students, truly.
Absolutely. We want our students to be functioning at their ability, at their potential. So, you know, that might just look different for different conditions, different students,
Right.
but the brain can change. Okay, let's do, I love it. We got lots of, we're posting links, you know, any references that we're making in these Q&As, we're posting links there, and so that you can click on those links and get access to them. We'll take one more because we have, I know, other amazing guests. We want to get to their clips as well, but keep posting questions. Let's take the last one from Courtney. My daughter says she can read faster in her head rather than reading out loud in 6th grade and at a 2nd grade pace. Can the brain to mouth pathway be wired more efficiently? We've heard students say that.
Right. A lot of times, especially with our dyslexic population, kids can read faster silently than orally because they don't have to read every word and they don't have to read perfectly accurately. They can grab concepts and ideas faster. They often have quite good comprehension, and so that allows them to compensate in that way and get a lot of information without having to read every word. And then, you know, when you're reading orally, of course, it is a slower process, but it is, you also have to be accurate and you have to say every word in order for it to make sense. So I'm sure it would be slower until her reading becomes really proficient.
Mm-hmm. And it might be a language retrieval issue as well, of just being able to accurately pull the correct word that, you know, matches what she's seeing, a synchrony problem. So those are also, you know, things that we test for and that we work on to help to bring together fluency. Okay, I love it. We got lots of engagement, lots of questions. I want to make sure that we hear from our next round of amazing guests. So keep posting your questions, your comments, and we will end the show with more Q&A after we hear from some more amazing guests.
All right. Thank you, Lauren. If you're just joining us, this is LD Expert Live. I'm Jill Stowell, founder of Stowell Learning Centers. We're talking about learning, the brain, dyslexia, and addressing the root of the challenges in order to make permanent changes. The longer I'm in this field, the more I realize that everything is connected. And it sometimes takes some creative detective work to put all those pieces together. Here is one of our viewers' all-time favorite guests and one of our favorite people, Dr. Giancarlo Licata, founder of Vital Head and Spinal Care and Vital Brain Training, to talk about everyone's learning superpower, sleep. There was a study by the CDC in 2016 that said that more than 1/3 of American adults are not getting enough sleep on a regular basis. And a study presented at the American Academy of Pediatrics last year indicated that 52% of children ages 6 to 17 get less than the recommended 9 hours of sleep. So we are kind of a sleep-deprived society, and that seems like a really big problem.
Right.
How does that impact functioning and learning?
Right. I mean, it's a problem because it's so prevalent, you know, but it's also a problem because it's so vital. It's so necessary for so many things. And so we're going to dive into some of the deeper reasons as to what sleep does, how it affects us, how it either becomes our superpower and helps our learning or our children learn and recover and be more emotionally regulated, or how it's actually hindering them over and over and over again, and how parents are spending all of this money for support and for and they're reading articles on what to do when there's something that's free. There's something that's probably more powerful than anything any single thing that they could do, and it's available to them just tonight. So hopefully we can go into that and we can empower all the parents to help their kids learn more.
Wow, that sounds amazing. When we were talking, you had said that to really understand sleep, we kind of need to understand some of the definitions.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, so so we're going to go, and if that's okay, Jill, one of the things that I want to do is establish how powerful sleep is first, if you're okay with that, and then we'll go right into the definitions, because I don't think that moms and especially moms, but us dads too, we lag behind. When our child is getting up in the morning, or our child is in school and they can't pay attention, and they're sitting at their desk tapping their feet, or the teachers are complaining and writing home saying that Johnny isn't able to pay attention in class, or he's disturbing his classmates, we would never even begin to think that that maybe it was the previous night's sleep that was starting to dysregulate him to begin with, right? Or if our daughter is having a hard time learning and she has to study for a big test and she's pulling all-nighters for every day for the last 5 days as she's preparing for this final exam, we wouldn't even begin to think that she's been sabotaging herself every day leading up to this exam, and that her brain is actually less able to learn, retain, and then recall information, right? So these are things that sleep is going to be able to help our children, and so that's where I want to kind of really, I want parents to know that I have 3 kids, and for me, when we started to regulate their sleep and kind of put some boundaries, we saw changes all over the place.
Sleep is just so important to look at when you see learning, memory, or emotional regulation problems, because it's during sleep that the learning from the day gets processed and set into memory, and where we work through emotions from the day in a safe way. Another stealthy factor in learning and behavior is food. Our next clip is with functional medicine physician, Dr. Tamika Henry. We were talking a little bit, when you talk about gluten, a lot of times that's related to a food sensitivity or some of these other sensitivities you're talking about.
Right.
So what might a parent notice if their child has a sensitivity to gluten or other foods?
Oh, great question. You may notice that the child is complaining of constipation. When they may be straining a lot, and they may be sitting in the bathroom longer than normal. You may see an outbreak in their skin, maybe consistent with eczema. So they'll have, typically it can be in the fold. So in the, gosh, you can't even see my arm. All right. In the folds here, you can see some, I would say it can be itchy. The skin can look irritated. It could be behind the neck. It could be behind the ears, behind the knees also. So any fold, any crease on the back of the hand and the skin, you could see some signs of irritation. Other thing you may notice that maybe the child eats it and they get sleepy. And you're like, okay, well, my child, they sleep on and off, they're growing, they're a teenager, but maybe it could be something related to the foods they're eating. Other things that can happen is they may have like an itchiness all around, like I just feel itchy, and you're like, what? I haven't done anything different. And the key thing about this is that it may not happen initially. So what happens is we can develop something that's called an oral intolerance, meaning that you were adults, but can happen with children. They were able to eat this before, but now they're not able to. I was able to eat almonds before, but now it bothers my stomach. I was able to do cheese before, but now it bothers my stomach. Or I was able to do this before and this happened. So that's a type of oral intolerance. So when we're thinking about different signs and symptoms, it's just a matter of when you're eating the same thing, or let's say you're doing gluten or you're doing dairy, just looking to see. And a lot of times, especially as our kids get older, we're not bathing them. So we're not seeing the different things in their skin where it may be irritated in the folds of the arms or the fold behind the knees or behind the ears or in the back of the neck, or even anywhere that there's where you can fold or bend. It's just a matter of, just paying attention and just stopping and looking, and then just saying, when you eat this, does this bother you? And kids may not understand that. Like, does your stomach hurt? Do you feel like when you go to the bathroom, is it easy for you? Does it look like little pebbles when you go to the bathroom, or is it soft like toothpaste? That's a big one. Constipation is huge, Jill. Very huge when it comes to that.
And, as you're talking about that, sensitivity on the skin, then that shows up. Also, then we see that kids become, it's like their whole system is now hypersensitive. So they're more irritable. Mm-hmm. They have lower frustration tolerance. They're going to, lash out more. And sometimes if you really watch when that happens, I remember a student that we had that he seemed to have that kind of behavior after lunch every day. And when we took a look to see what was he eating for lunch every day, he had a peanut butter sandwich every day. And it turned out there was a correlation between what he was eating and his behavior.
Oh, you hit the nail right on the head. It's because they may be even more like start jumping off of stuff more. Like they were already like my kids. I remember when my son was younger and my mom was like, Tamika, my mom has no boys. And Mom, Tamika, your son's Miles is on the cabinet. I'm like, Mom, that's not normal. Get him down. So like jumping off of stuff more. You can even notice, I even been to a few conferences and read about how when a child is eating a certain way, and it's impacting their whole system, you'll even notice the writing being not really legible. Mm-hmm. And then what happens as you start to change things, the writing becomes so clear. And I was like, no, this can't be. But then I started to see it over and over in different areas. I'm like, it impacts the whole entire body.
Right. My son actually has some food sensitivities, which he didn't realize until he was an adult, or maybe, as you said, things changed chemically as an adult. But changing his diet had a huge impact on how he felt. And I remember one day after he'd been really careful about his diet for a few months, he said, I can tell that my brain is working better. It makes so much sense that diet and sleep can impact learning. In our last clip here, licensed clinical psychologist Dr. Regine Muradian talks about something you might not realize affects learning and regulation, but that I'll bet you have in your home: video games. Well, I want to start with an issue that was a concern before the pandemic and has become an even bigger issue now: video games. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about what video games do in the brain and how that impacts our kids.
Yes. So I wanted to touch upon maybe just like some research that was recently done. It was like by Mark Paulus. And what they had found is that the video games really impacted the structure of the brain and the activity of the brain. And they did find actually structural changes in the brain and in the functionality. So I think that was really interesting, as I was also looking into what are some new advances and research out there, as this has been such a common topic for years, but even more so now. So one of the things that I'm just noticing just in general in my practice and as a parent, and also what other parents are reporting, are impacts on attention, irritability, kids are becoming more aggressive once they come off the game. So really, noticing that there's such a huge increase just in the aggressive behavior, which makes a lot of sense, as one of the most common played games are usually, there's Fortnite and there's so many other ones that they're playing that can have some violence in it. And you will see them kind of tapping at the screen. And, there's so much aggressive play in terms of competing and winning. And so I think that also plays a role into how they feel once they're detached and they come off the game, and how they function during the day after that.
Mm-hmm. And I've read that can even be kind of like similar to soldiers, that aggression and irritability.
Yeah, so it reminds me a little bit of some desensitization that tends to happen where, if you're playing hours on end, the same type of repetitive, aggressive type behavior, whether it's shooting, whether it's, more obviously the more aggressive games versus the calmer games, we are noticing definitely an increase in aggression, a desensitization to the impulse, right? That is all managed through the frontal lobe, and they just don't have that impulse control as regulated. That's what I'm noticing.
Mm-hmm. Many parents call you and they call us at Stowell Learning Centers about their child or teen's poor executive function. Executive function is developmental, and it's a process that develops well into the 20s. So, obviously video games can't get all the blame, but executive functions are frontal lobe functions. And if the frontal lobe, as you said, is getting turned off or desensitized, then we are going to see a lack of tact or poor self-management and impulse control.
Yes, that's a very good point. And also, what I'm also noticing is the patience level. They don't have as much patience as they used to. But again, I think the good news is, and I'm sure we'll go over that, is how much do we regulate that piece? So it doesn't stay forever. We don't want to frighten anyone. But just for parents and caregivers and teachers, and just creating this conversation about what's healthy and, how to moderate and regulate it.
Video games are not always a bad thing, but like everything we've looked at today, they are a factor to be considered when trying to understand the root of learning or behavior problems. This is LD Expert Live. I'm Jill Stowell, founder of Stowell Learning Centers. Lauren and I and our whole team are so grateful for all of you viewing and to all of our incredible guests. I just wanted to put clips from every single one of them in this show. They have helped to create an invaluable resource library of episodes for parents and anyone interested in learning and attention challenges. Lauren and I are going to go to the chat for one more Q&A, so post your questions and comments.
Yes. Let's see. So we have, let's see if I can get it. There we go. Amy asking, where can I get info on the primitive reflexes? We were talking about primitive reflexes in the last segment. I can take this one since I am the moderator of Mom Squad, our private Facebook group. There are several places that you can find information on primitive reflexes that we have. One, Jill's book, At Wit's End, definitely. You can, chapter 8 is on primitive reflexes and core learning skills, as well as chapter 15 kind of talks about the training involved with integrating primitive reflexes. And then also I mentioned Mom Squad is our private Facebook group, and that is a community where I post resources. We have parents that kind of share their experiences with each other. I've created several guides. And one guide is specifically, a guide is kind of a sequence of related resources. So one guide is dedicated to primitive reflexes. So I posted, we test for 17 different primitive reflexes. So I posted that list and also the descriptions of how they impact either attention, learning, or behavior. Each reflex kind of has a different way of presenting itself in humans. So that list is in Mom Squad. As well as I've posted a few different research studies, published research studies on primitive reflexes and learning, the correlation between primitive reflexes and learning. Specifically, there's 2 studies done on the correlation between primitive reflexes and ADHD. So that research is there in case you want to go down a rabbit hole. So Mom Squad, we also have some general information on our website as well. So you can, learn all about primitive reflexes, in those resources. And we posted the links in the chat. Let's see. And then Carla is asking for where can I get some more information about auditory training to see if this could be a good approach for my son?
Well, the resources that Lauren just mentioned are also good places to look. My book, At Wit's End, and I'm sure that she has things posted in Mom Squad. We also invite parents to do a free consultation about their child. And so if you would like to schedule a consultation and just talk to someone from one of our centers about what's going on with your child and kind of describe, what you're seeing, they're very well versed in listening and dialoguing with you about that.
Mm-hmm. There's some amazing people on the phones. Something, I don't know if we ever must mention this before in the show. Our website got a facelift. So stowellcenter.com is our website, and we have a tab at the top called Solution, labeled Solution. And on that page is the Learning Skills Continuum and the different programs that address each kind of rung at the continuum. And many of them, they have descriptors, and every program that we create for each student is unique. So no student is going to do every single program at that rung, but you can kind of go through the list and the descriptions of the programs and see if that sounds like some of the skills you're concerned about with your son. So that's another place. That's on stowellcenter.com/the-solution, and we can post the link to that as well. Okay, I think I got everybody's questions. It was a lot. Again, I love how passionate people are about the science. So, Jill's book is going to be a huge resource of just, listing all of those, the science, the techniques, all of those things. I know a lot of you are like me and like to go down a rabbit hole. And as Jill said, this is our final live broadcast of LD Expert, but we'll be coming to you soon in podcast format. I know for me as a busy working mom, it's a little bit easier to listen than it is to watch. So I'm excited for that. And we do want to continue to connect with you live as well. So at the end of each month, we'll be hosting a live Q&A and discussion at our peace meetings. So that's our monthly parent support group that meets online. Make sure to subscribe to our weekly newsletter at stowellcenter.com/podcast for exact details like the date and how to register. And like I've been saying, if you can't make the peace meetings or can't make them each month, and you'd like to have ongoing support in a community of parents with children with learning and attention challenges, we invite you to join our private Facebook group, Mom Squad, SLC Mom Squad. We have great discussions from parents posting questions about their bright but struggling children. I post guides like I talked about. I have several guides related to different learning challenges, self-care tips, other resources. You can go down a rabbit hole. So that's what it's meant to be. If you want to join that group and peruse all the different research that we've accumulated over the years, strategies, resources that our past LD Expert guests have included or talked about in our episodes, I post them in Mom Squad. So I welcome you to join.
Perfect. As Lauren said, we're introducing a new format for LD Expert to make the content more convenient and accessible for you. Beginning in February, which is oh my gosh, next week, we are launching an audio podcast with a weekly newsletter that is jam-packed with valuable content. Each month, we'll focus on one topic so you can take a deep dive into the science, treatment, and success of overcoming learning or attention challenges. February will be dedicated to all things dyslexia, how to recognize it, practical strategies you can use at home, specialized treatments that we use here at Stowell Learning Centers, and success stories from families who have overcome the challenges with dyslexia and how they did it. Visit stowellcenter.com/podcast to receive the podcast episodes right to your inbox with our weekly newsletter of curated resources and live events. Also, be on the lookout for that new book we've been talking about, Take the Stone Out of the Shoe, coming out in April. This is packed with hands-on tools for parents and teachers, as well as the research that you've been asking for on the programs we use to eliminate struggles with dyslexia and other learning and attention challenges. I have a second book coming out in August, A Parent's Guide to Dyslexia, so be watching out for that one as well. We're very busy over here. We'll keep you posted, so stay in the loop by going to stowellcenter.com/podcast to receive the podcast episodes, resources for you, and information about the books and upcoming live events. Stowell Learning Center is the comprehensive solution to learning disabilities for children and adults. We're on a mission to permanently eliminate the difficulties associated with learning disabilities, dyslexia, auditory processing, and attention challenges. This is for you. If you would like a free consultation for yourself or your child, give us a call or visit our website at stowellcenter.com. This has been a very challenging time in history. We have loved connecting with you each week as we navigate this journey together. I can't say enough about the depth and heart and insights of our guests. Each and every one of them has been incredible. It is so encouraging to know that these people are out there working on behalf of children and parents. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you on the podcast.